Hey, it's Jason Isaac. I'm a senior fellow with Life Powered, the national initiative of the Texas Public Policy Foundation to raise America's energy IQ. And it is the final day of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Texas Policy Summit here in 2024 at the AT&T Hotel and Conference Center. There's been a lot of talk this week about parental empowerment, education freedom. That seems to be a top topic. So I'm so glad to be joined by the chairman of the State Board of Education, Aaron Kinsey. But we might not necessarily talk directly about parental empowerment. We're going to talk a little bit about some policy that I had an opportunity to work on in 2020 and 2021 that turned out to be Senate Bill 13. The ultimate policy says if you boycott, divest, or sanction fossil fuels, you're no longer welcome to do business with the state of Texas. So you may be wondering what that has to do with the State Board of Education, but maybe our chairman, Aaron Kinsey, can fill us in a little bit about that. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Great for you to be here all week. Appreciate your commitment to education in Texas, and thanks for your service.
Thank you. Always love coming to Policy Summit. It's one of my favorite times of the year. I've been excited to see a bunch of old friends and learn a bunch of new things about great policy ideas. So how the State Board of Education kind of fits in with what you were talking about, the legislation that you spent a lot of time and effort working on, is that the State Board of Education is charged with the oversight of the Permanent School Fund. Now, we do this in conjunction with the General Land Office and two appointees from the Governor's Office, but it is one of our primary duties constitutionally for the State Board of Education. So that $53 billion fund, we need to shepherd it and make sure that it is here for generations. It is the permanent school fund. It is supposed to be permanent in nature, so into perpetuity. One of the things that most people don't know about that fund is that we get about $1 billion a year, actually, from oil and gas royalties via the General Land Office. So $1 billion a year flowing into the fund, and we have a duty to protect that. Now, that's kind of a fiduciary duty that we have, obviously, but then we have the legal piece that you worked on. So happy to talk about more about either of those, whichever one you want to go to.
So what are the funds used for in the Permanent School Fund? I know there's been some writing about that this week, and I think there's maybe some misinformation that's out there about what the funds are actually used for. Are these used for like teacher retirement?
No, they're not used for teacher retirement. So the Permanent School Fund has two primary purposes. One is to help fund education, and we do that through instructional materials money that comes out. So it's been about $1 billion a year coming out of the fund. The second duty is to provide credit enhancement, essentially, for schools doing school bonds. So it's called the Bond Guarantee Program. School goes out, maybe their credit is A. We come in and we guarantee that debt with our balance sheet, and that gets them AAA credit. So it's one of the ways that Texas has actually been able to have really the envy of the country from a facilities perspective at the local level for schools.
So this is helping build new facilities on campuses, expanding educational opportunities, and essentially getting a lower cost of capital.
100% lower cost of capital for the local districts to be able to access. And so that's via the credit enhancement function of the balance sheet, but then the outflows are going directly to the textbooks, essentially.
So are there any like sales tax dollars or other revenue that goes into the Permanent School Fund, or is it primarily oil and gas royalties?
It's primarily oil and gas royalties.
Okay, so wow. And so there was, in Senate Bill 13, it says it directs state agencies that they can't do business with certain companies that may be on a boycott list because they either boycott, divest, or sanction. And we're pretty clear on the language, and you know, there's some companies out there that have a pretty significant investment in oil and gas that are on the boycott list because they're investing in these companies and then forcing those companies to do things that may be counter to their best interest of their shareholders, best interest of the business, and really the best interest of Texas, adopting some policies that align with environmental, social, and governance that aren't the law of the land, that are contrary to producing energy here in this country and actually shifting production to other countries. And I'd prefer that we produce things here in Texas because you've been in the business. We produce things more responsibly, namely oil and gas and coal and nuclear energy. We produce that more responsibly here than anywhere else on the planet. So are there any announcements that you'd be willing to talk about that the Permanent School Fund or the State Board of Education staff and you have enforced this week?
Well, earlier this week, the announcement was made that the fund would be divesting $8.5 billion from BlackRock. And so that's been kind of the news of the week. But really, it's been the news of the last 3 years. So you talk about, you said 2020 you started working on the legislation.
Yes.
It passed in 2021 out of both chambers, signed into law by the governor. And then the comptroller is charged with essentially a very large portion of enforcing it in a lot of ways. So the comptroller, Glenn Hager, comes up with a list of companies that meet the criteria that you laid out is included in the bill. And so once it gets to the state agency, our job is just to follow the law. Now, we have a list from the comptroller that he has made. We've complied with all the intricacies around sending notices and letters, and we've traded letters, and we sent those back to the comptrollers, just 100% in accordance with the law. He's also sent us a letter, though, and that letter from last February said you should strongly reconsider the relationships that you have with these entities. And so that I'm paraphrasing. It's about
Sure.
a page and a half, and you can find it online right now if you're really looking for it. But that letter, had caused us to, hey, we need to have conversations about this. We've had conversations at the board for the last year about this, and it was this week that the announcement was made that we were going to make the move.
Fantastic way to protect fiduciary responsibility. That's what we wanted out of Senate Bill 13, is we wanted to ensure fiduciary responsibility was put above and beyond anything else. Not political ideology, not the weaponization of capital, the politicization of capital, but make sure that we have a solid return on investment. And it's interesting, you mentioned that this letter may be on a website somewhere. What's also interesting is there's groups out there, and the comptroller, I believe, used his justification for putting some of these companies on the boycott list is their involvement in other globalist organizations, namely the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. You can go look at those websites. It happened in a serious Breitbart XM radio interview I was doing earlier this week, where the guy pulls up the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero website and starts reading from the main page. And he's like, this is a direct target to put oil and gas companies out of business. And so I think their involvement, and you can look, again, people can look on the websites and find those pledges that the CEOs of these financial institutions that we've entrusted to oversee permanent school fund dollars, we've entrusted to oversee teachers' retirements, are a clear violation of fiduciary responsibility, and they've signed these pledges to do this. It's in my opinion, it's an illegal cartel. I know some attorneys general feel the same way, and they're filing suit and doing investigations on this. So I appreciate you and applaud you for fiduciary responsibility. I know you've been kind of the boogeyman on this because you're just enforcing the laws that are on the books.
Yeah, enforcing the laws in the book. The other thing I would say is fiduciary responsibility. When we look at that, we have some illiquid investments in our portfolio with BlackRock, and we did not divest those because that is not in the best interest of the state of Texas to take a haircut on an illiquid investment just to exit. So there is a lot of thought that has to go into this and considering how to protect Texas dollars and do our best duty to put the Texas funds at the forefront of our mind when we're making decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting to note just in the last couple of weeks, it's come to light that the employee retirement system here in Texas, which is a pension fund, which does help retirees, has lost millions of dollars on bad bets on some of these insolvent banks, like the bank that collapsed here, and the name's escaping me right now, Silicon Valley Bank, that collapsed earlier here in the last just couple of years, that had an incredibly high ESG rating, which is kind of laughable, and they collapsed shortly after. But they had significant investments and lost millions of dollars, and it turns out that their advisor that was making these investment decisions is fully committed to the ESG agenda, which I call the China ESG agenda. It's shifting capital away from American companies into Chinese companies to the detriment of our financial security. So again, applause for you for looking out for these dollars that are going to be funding education here in Texas for generations. So well done.
Well, thank you. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws, and that's what we're about, right?
That's great. Aaron, thanks for being on. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Enjoy the rest of the summit.